Accessing Secure Channel. The Agent Files, where aspiring agents rise and masters flourish. Powered by Agent Builder Coaching. Mission initiated.
Hi there, this is Peter Fan for the Agent Files for Agent Builder Coaching. This specific series, is for those that have finished their educational requirements to get licensed, but have not actually been licensed for any period of time. So not quite licensed agents. That's why we call it almost agents. Now, this week we're going to talk about building some repeatable processes, systematized operating procedures or standard operating procedures, and those that you can already start preparing, and by doing so actually learn a lot about the business before you even start. And it gives you a real insight of the kind of operational processes that take place in the business. Good business, very busy or not so busy, these processes exist. And the sooner you become kind of familiar with them, the sooner a lot of the steps and idiosyncrasies of this business start to make more and more sense. And you can start filling your own identity and personality along the way. And a lot of those are not on the transactional side. A lot of them are actually part of your marketing and your relationship with clients and so on and so forth. And so we'll jump right in and go into each of those types of models, and I hope you enjoy it, because it is actually one of those key things that a lot of realtors are not actually all that good at. Okay, so the better you kind of prepare yourself for it, and not necessarily take for granted that, hey, you'll catch up later. It's actually much better to have this in place before you ever get started. And now is that ideal period of time, because you actually have a little bit of time to think about these things. Okay. Michael Gerber is a really big name in kind of entrepreneurial thinking. He wrote the E-Myth and the E-Myth Revisited. There's actually a real estate version of that book. It's not actually as good as the original E-Myth Revisited, because it follows one particular agent that did particularly well, but it's just not quite for rookie agents, to be fair. But the E-Myth Revisited absolutely is. But he made a very, very solid observation saying systems run the business and people run the systems. And it's a really distinct understanding, is that systems will run your business, right? You apply the systems on a consistent basis. And we've talked about the McDonald's example, but you can go to any well-run business and you'll see that there is consistency in their operations, right? It doesn't matter whether you come in on Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday, whether Johnny's on the shift or Bobby's on shift. The service delivery, the way the operation works is the same. So you can expect great results because there's really good systems in play. This is becoming more and more apparent in all levels of services, and more so now than in the past, because you can very easily recognize the businesses that are not keeping up with the needs of the consumer, because they're not really well organized, not really well structured. So it's a really important piece to recognize that the systems run that business and the people run the systems. If there's no systems, then everything happens kind of by accident. And that's where all these inconsistencies show up in other businesses. And you want to prevent that from happening for yourself. Okay. So why, therefore, systemized operating procedures matter so much is that it prevents mistakes, right? Oversight. Oops, I missed that. I didn't check this. I didn't check that. And so on and so forth. Not that the best systems in the world don't always deliver perfect results. There are still things going to happen, but it's less likely, much less likely. Okay? So, and it therefore reduces stress. It gives you confidence. It gives you clarity, right? Follow this path. Follow this journey, right? And it creates therefore consistency across all client interactions. And by the way, the clients also appreciate it because you can engage them in your system. You can say, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. If you remember going to school, the really good teachers, they would typically teach by saying, well, today this is what we're going to do. So they explained in advance what was going to happen. Then you were going to do it. Then at the end of the day or the end of the lesson, they would have a quick review of what you just did, right? So now you've had an introduction, the actual lesson, and a review of the lesson. That's a system, right? And it's their teaching system. Well, you you can apply the same to yourself, right? What if you now understand that, hey, you can prepare a lot of these things well in advance so that by the time that you actually need to deliver it, it's becoming second nature already because you've already run through all of these examples and situations in your own mind and have articulated them and documented them and committed them to paper. Right? It will really, really set you apart real quick. So it's a really good idea to do. Okay. So therefore, it frees up mental energy, right? So therefore, you could pay more attention to your clients, more attention to what they need, want, and what they deserve, right? Now, and you're going to get to a point at some point in time or another that you say, hey, this system here, whatever it is, installing of signs or doing photography or filling in forms or what have you, this system I have now so well organized that I can actually delegate it. I can let it go, give it to somebody else, and then monitor the results from that implementation. And again, the systems run the business and the people run the systems. Right? Really important. Now, so what is it? Some people call it standardized or standard operating process. Some people call it systemized operating process. The terms are somewhat interchangeable. And so it's basically the step-by-step instructions, right? What to do, how to do it, when to do it. Right? Doesn't always talk about why to do it, although that's a good idea in the initial understanding as to why am I putting this standardized or systematized operations process in place. Why am I doing that? Well, I want to be consistent. I want to do things better. I want to deliver this particular piece, the listing presentation, the buyer presentation, how I'm dealing with buyers, how I'm dealing with sellers. I want to make that consistent across all services that we deliver. Then, okay, what does that look like? Right? So, what are some examples? Well, new listing intake, checklist for documentation, but it can also be working with buyers, doing open houses, how you enter data into your system, right? New clients, new inquiries, how that goes into your system, and what happens next, right? So a standard operating procedure in a CRM, for example, is oftentimes referred to as a workflow, a pipeline, a funnel. So there's different terms that actually kind of do the same thing, right? In a technology based. I hope all of that makes sense because you'll become quite familiar with it. So one of the standard operating procedures is your daily schedule. In a previous session, we talked about time blocking, and time blocking is a way of creating an operating procedure, right? Because you're saying, hey, I'm going to, from 9 to 11, this is what I'm going to be doing. Well, there you go. There's an operating procedure now in place for that block of time. Now, what you're exactly going to do in that time block, you can then also further define and refine and articulate even deeper and more specific as to, well, in the first hour, I'm going to talk to all of the people that I talked to last week, right? In the second hour, I'm going to talk to some new people or people that I haven't talked for a while, right? So that would be further refinement of your time block and your procedures, of course. Your sphere of influence, touch point checklist is a very good way to create a standardized operating procedure. Because again, consistency becomes, a habit, real momentum, and that compounds pretty quick actually. You can do some transaction checklists, mock versions, but you can look into your company's future company's procedure and say, hey, what transactional checklist do you have for working with buyers, with sellers? How do I submit paperwork to the office? What does that look like? What does that feel like? So that you can align whatever happens on that side of the transaction, the listings and the sales, with what your need to do on your side of it, and so that the two connect, that there's an alignment, um, that it's synchronized, right? Again, it will make your life a whole lot easier, and it will kind of force you to start thinking in those terms of what is a transaction and what is a listing, what is working with buyers, and what does a deposit flow actually look like, feel like, act like. Okay. Now, on a more practical side, certainly in the beginning of your career, open houses is going to be, I'm sure, to some degree, one part of your business or another. Okay. Well, one of the things that you could do, and there's no harm in doing this before your license, is literally go and visit open houses. Now, be honest and be candid to the agents that you're visiting, because they're all going to be relatively receptive for you being there and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be a real estate agent soon. I'm just checking out what the market is doing, what's going on, and so on and so forth, and just want to learn more about the business before I'm actually into it. So I'm not here to buy the house, but would you mind if I do a walkthrough and so I learn a little bit of, and then be observant, right? What is the agent doing? How is he responding? How is he treating you? How is he treating other people? He or she, I mean, um, and so that you learn over visiting 10, 15, 20, 30 open houses as to what are the patterns. So what are other people doing? What are you learning from that? What kind of systems can you create? And more importantly, how can you separate yourself from that? How can you be a little better, a little smarter, a little bit more creative, a little bit more engaging? Well, which open houses did you really enjoy interacting with the agent, and which ones were only so, right? So sometimes that's a really good way to create your own little understanding of a system. Okay, never mind the fact that it boosts your confidence and you start building some networks, because even though all the other realtors in essence are your competition, you also can't live without them. So having good peer relationships is not a bad thing in general anyways. And again, you don't necessarily have to be licensed to do that. Okay, so here's a simple, right, a simple outline of a systematized operating procedure. Right, there's a trigger, some sort of a trigger. Somebody made a phone call. Right, now, what do you do with that phone call? Or somebody attended an open house. Now, what did you do with that person at the open house? Right? So, what are the steps? Right, step one, step two, step three. Right? An open house. Well, you might say, okay, for me to do an open house, actually do an open house, not the people attending an open house, but people you organizing an open house. Now, what are you going to do? Well, first and foremost, you need to figure out which open house, right? If it's not your listing, then it's going to be somebody else's listing. Well, how are you going to organize that? Right? You got to talk to a realtor. You got to confirm the date, the time, to get permission from the seller, what can and what can't be advertised, and so on and so forth. And then you're going to learn more about the property, right? So there's two things already, right? Then you're going to kind of collect your thoughts as to what are the comparables, because people inevitably walk into an open house. Open houses themselves only sell 5% of the time. So 95% of the time, if they're real buyers, they're going to buy something else. Well, then you need to know what's in the market in comparable to what you're having an open house. So you need to know that, right? Then you need to collect some marketing materials. You need to have your business cards sorted out, some flyers, some brochures. What are you going to say? How are you going to actually tour the open house? Don't sit like every other realtor, not every other realtor, but some other realtors, they sit in the kitchen. Well, go ahead, do your thing, right? And if you have questions, I'll be right over. That's not how you show an open house. Right? That's not the best way to do it. Where do you put your signs? How many signs do you need? Right? You don't want to If your open houses on Saturday you start thinking about, oh yeah, I need signs, I need directionals, I need notices in the, all of that stuff you need to prepare for. So what does that look like? Right? So you create your checklist. Okay. What other tools and resources might you need? What is the deadline? Right. And who's the owner, as in who's actually responsible for it all? That's an important part of your standard operating procedure. Who actually owns this? Right? If you are going to delegate some pieces, like for instance, photography is a typical one. Okay, well, then what does that look like? How are you going to get that instruction to the photographer for them to do photography on a listing? Right? And does it involve floor plans or aerials or drone shots or 3D stuff? And do you want AI to be included or not? And so on and so forth. So that's just photography. Lots of bits and pieces here. All right, so I hope I'm making myself clear that a lot of this stuff you can prepare for and think through. I'm not here to scare you, but this is actually the stuff that where the rubber hits the road, where you're actually getting involved with the real part of what this business is all about. And a lot of this you can prepare for. It doesn't have to be an incredible learning curve after you get licensed. Between you writing your exam and actually being licensed, there's typically, certainly in BC, between 6 to 8 weeks. So you have 6 to 8 weeks to do a lot of preparatory stuff that won't cost you any money necessarily, other than energy and a bit of time and possibly a little bit of gas to drive from one open house or from one place to another. But you can learn an awful lot that can save you so much time and so much overwhelm in that initial phase. Okay, just giving you some thoughts for idea here. So here's your exercise, your homework. Pick one activity. You know, uh, sphere of influence calls, or initiation, or a launch campaign. That might be a really good one to kind of spend some time on. Is creating a launch campaign for your career. Right? What are you going to say? What are you going to present? What are you going to write? What are you going to do on social media? What kind of videos can you create now? What kind of photography? What kind of marketing material? What kind of branding are you going to do? That could be a whole set of exercises right there, right? Or you do an open house or a lead follow up. Create something, one a week. I'm going to suggest that you do at least one or two a week of these kind of SOPs. And then write down each and every step from start to finish and beyond, right? So if it's a follow-up campaign from a new lead to now being embedded into your system and having a loyal relationship, okay, what comes after that initial stage of connecting with people and creating a loyal, symbiotic business professional relationship with somebody? What comes next, right? Are they going to be on a drip campaign, or how are you going to follow up with them forever, right? That's an important piece. And again, write down each and every step and then put it in your computer system, put it in your CRM. So, and ask, if I gave this list to somebody else, could they do it? Could they actually perform what your intentions were with this particular SOP? And if they can't, then go back, refine it, fine tune it. Be very clear. Don't use little buzzwords like it, that, or this. Now, be specific. Fill in all the blanks. Make it VA proof. Because keep in mind, if somebody sees your materials and needs to make sense out of it, you need to pre-think what they may be questioning about, right? So when you read something and you can make sense of it because you understand everything, then change hats. Become your virtual assistant. Can they read it and get the same understanding of what it is that you're saying? And if you can, then great. If not, then tweak it, right? This is the perfect time to do that. And then, refine it, keep refining it until it's clear and repeatable so that you can actually delegate stuff, right? That's running a business. By the way, do you know the difference between a business and a career? It's a really kind of an important question. A lot of agents in this business are at best self-employed. At best, they're not running a business. Okay? And what's the difference is if you can walk away from your business, say go for a holiday for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and come back, and the business is in better condition than when you left, now you own a business because things are looked after and actually continue while you're away. Right? If your business stops with the day that you go on a holiday, then there's a problem. Now, a lot of agents will say, yeah, but you can do remote stuff. Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff remote. But if you're on holidays, are you still making your phone calls? Not the ones that are urgent and immediate because you're in the middle of a transaction. No, the consistency ones, right? The marketing part, the staying in touch with your sphere of influence. Because if you stop doing that, if that doesn't happen, if there is no consistency in your newsletters, your market updates, your social media follow-ups, and whatever else that you're doing, if there is breakdowns in that consistency, it doesn't show up immediately, so you think you can get away with it. It shows up 6 months, 9 months down the road. Because again, keep in mind, that's that incubation time. So what system do you have in place to replace yourself? Okay, that's systems. Now, don't worry about it immediately because it evolves, it grows. But if you start with the small little systems that you can think about at this point in time, then you get already in the habit of system thinking, right? Operating procedure thinking. So you're not just having it all in your head. You're understanding that when you commit it to paper, now it becomes something that somebody else can do for you if and when necessary. And that's a really, really important piece as you evolve and grow in the business. It will save you weeks, if not months later on. Okay, so it's a really, and it teaches you to truly understand all of the steps, the idiosyncrasies that go on in business. It's a big deal. Okay, all right. So create a, SOPs. It will actually create a business that will run smoother, better, more efficient, more effective. You will lose fewer leads, fewer clients because everybody's looked after, right? Now, this time before your license is actually a really good time to do this because you have a little bit of time available and you can learn from observation an awful lot, right? You can look at and say, okay, I need to do something for my open house, as I said, or I need to do something for, what am I going to do consistently on social media? Okay, well, look up, right? Not just glance at but follow what certain realtors are doing. If there are particular realtors that you highly regard or very much respect, or you like how they present them, or how you don't like what they're doing, you can learn from both, right? Hey, I'm never going to do that. Okay, so if you're not never going to do that, what is your system going to look like? Well, the opposite of what that is. Okay, then articulate it, define it. What does that mean? Okay. When it becomes repeatable, it becomes scalable, and that really makes a huge difference in your future growth. And what I mean by this is, say, for example, is that you're really good at working with people that are retiring. Okay. Now, if you optimize all of that and you operate in a smaller community, at some point in time or another, you run out of all the opportunities that are 55 and over. Okay, so now maybe the next phase that you look at is, okay, first-time home buyers, right? New people coming into the market and new buyers. Okay, well, all that you've learned as far as steps, not necessarily the idiosyncrasies about what 55 and over people are facing and dealing with, but the steps are the same, right? The marketing steps, the consistency of getting in touch and staying in touch are the same. What you provide, that changes, but the steps are repeatable. And again, it's the systems that run your business, right? And you run the system. So when you adapt your systems from one model, one purpose to the next purpose, next application of that system, It's just tweaking the language inside of the pieces and so on, but the system is repeatable, and therefore you all of a sudden can scale relatively quickly as you see opportunities show up. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's actually once you get the system thinking part embedded in how you approach things, you will realize that it actually makes your life so much easier when you begin with a system. If you have to do anything 3 times, it ought to be documented as a system, right? Because it's repeatable. You ought to be able to delegate. Is what I'm getting at. And then, yeah, it becomes very confidence building as well. So this can actually make a huge difference very early on in how you get into the business as well, because now all of a sudden you're licensed in here and you've got half of your operating protocols and processes already in place. You've got your launch campaign already to go, right? If your branding is set up because you've spent time on creating an operating procedure and you implemented some of these things already. Isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't that be great? That would really make a huge difference. So if you drafted 2 SOPs a week, not just this week, but every week going forward until you're actually licensed and beyond, and then create folders in your Google Drive, as we talked about in the other parts of your operating methodologies and your technology, and store everything, right? So that everything gets together. If you have systems for your open houses, have a folder for open house operations, right? And here are the checklist and the bits and pieces, and here are the examples of the flyers and the brochures and so on and so forth. Okay, it becomes very, very helpful. There's so much, and you hear from me talking about it. There is so much that goes on, right? That having good structure to it will dramatically make it easier for you to kind of retain it all and to cope with it all as you grow. And you and again, you don't need to do it all, but you need to figure out, okay, I'm going to spend time on open houses, working with seniors or first time home buyers or my sphere of influence or whatever that is. Pick one that is somewhat organic to you, right? That is very comfortable to you, and one that will stretch you a little bit in the sense that, hey, I need to actually be proactive in engaging with these people. And it may be people that you have a connection with, but you don't necessarily have a personal connection with. Does that make sense? So you may have an affinity because you like that type of business or type of hobby or sports or whatever else, but you haven't really engaged with the people inside of that niche, right? Well, that's okay. But then because you have a symbiotic connection because of your you liking the sport or the hobby, makes it easier to make an initial approach, right? Or you may go as far as just visiting some of those events and getting to know 1, 2, 3 people at one of those events, and that then adds to your sphere of influence list again. Right? Again, little systems that you got to think about as to how you're going to apply. So those are some action items. Create a folder, review them quarterly, update them as needed, as in, you know, um, always be looking for improving things a little bit, not all the time, not for the sake of improving, but that if you see something that needs attention, and that can sometimes be a real lifesaver. All of a sudden, you tweak something, and all of a sudden you go from some results out of it to huge results out of it. Right? So, and then share one SOP with a mentor for feedback. Right? Talk to people that you know, like, and trust in the business, whether that is us or somebody else that you have an affinity or a relationship with, as to, this is what I put together. Does this work? This doesn't make sense. Okay. Suggested reading. I already talked about the E-Myth Revisited from Michael Gerber. It's a really fun read. It'll take you, I don't know, a day and a half to read it. It's kind of a storytelling way of how to go from job thinking to entrepreneurial thinking. That's what the E stands for, entrepreneurial myth. and how that story kind of produces a real change, a real shift in how the person in question or the persons in question shifted their whole mindset from job thinking to business thinking, and it's a quite a fun little story. At least that's how I think of it. And then the Checklist Manifesto, we have talked about this book as well. It's really exactly what it talks about. It promotes the use of checklists in a big way because it keeps you honest, keeps you on track, and keeps you, you can inspect what you expect, right? That's kind of one of those little mantras that happens when you become systematized. You start having a way to hold the operations accountable, not from a punitive point of view, but just making sure that everything is taken care of, right? And then if you've decided on the brokerage that you're going to work with, then digging into what they can share with you at this point in time can be quite helpful in aligning what your thoughts are about systems and operations with what is required inside of the company and how they do things, so that you can kind of line everything up in the same way. Okay, I hope all of this makes sense. This is kind of heavy duty stuff already. Okay, and I get it. That this, you may kind of look at this and go like, do I really want to need to? Yeah, you kind of have to, and now is a good time to do it because you probably have a little bit of time to do it. Now, yes, this comes after the heavy duty studying for your license, and all of a sudden we put this heavy duty stuff on it. But as you know, there is, or you should know by now if you've followed some of the other episodes, the licensing education gives you about 30% of what you need to know. What we're trying to talk to you about is all the other bits that are really important from a business point of view, because as you know by now, that there's very little about the actual day-to-day business that is being taught in the education, in the licensing education. So that's why we try to catch up with you on that in preparation of you taking out your license, so that the day that you are licensed, all of a sudden this is starting to not be so overwhelming, right? Okay, hope that all helps. Hope to see you on the next episode, and hope you have a fantastic week. All the best. Take care.
File saved. The Agent Files. For more missions, agents' tools, and tactical strategies, subscribe and follow the Agent Files, powered by Agent Builder Coaching. Until next time, stay sharp. Your next mission awaits.